we've been talking about for quite a while now this idea of extraterrestrial life, especially in terms of intelligent extraterrestrial life, or or I should say, and the possibility that it could be this extraterrestrial life might be smarter than us and even have free will. And what are the implications of that? So the first thing we did was took a look at a bunch of sources from a textual perspective. Is it possible that such a thing would exist? Are there sources, classical sources, reflect that there might be such a thing, or that there might not be such a thing? And then we start to take a look at more on a philosophical level. What are the implications philosophically, spiritually, of the fact that there could be intelligent life with free will? And I just wanted to frame this discussion with a notion that it's bandied about a lot, and it's extremely relevant, and that is the term exceptionalism. So that's for those of you interested in politics, that term is used a lot in terms of like American exceptionalism, Israeli exceptionalism, Jewish exceptionalism. So I'm just going to read to you the Wikipedia definition of exceptionalism. Exceptionalism is the perception or belief that a species, country, society, institution, movement, individual, or time period is exceptional, unusual, or extraordinary. The term carries the implication, whether or not specified, that the referent is superior in some way. Okay, so I think that's a good way of framing the notion of human exceptionalism or Jewish exceptionalism. If that is something that's a critical belief, that we believe that being human is exceptional, then the notion that there could be other intelligent beings, even more intelligent than us, and possessing free will, certainly threatens, obviously, by definition, the notion of human exceptionalism. And is that a problem? Right? Is it a problem to give up the notion of human exceptionalism? Now, we all know how Bruce weighs in on this. Seems to be quite a crusader against the notion of human exceptionalism. That's due to his excessive humility. So therefore, I know it's a hard problem for you. And so I want to go on with this discussion. And what we saw last time was the Rambam seems to reject the notion of human exceptionalism. He talks about angels being superior and the other what we call separate intelligences. He actually thought that the planets and the stars were disembodied intelligences. They are not stuffed like we think of them. And he makes that very clear. And we saw that Rob Cook says that, in fact, the Rambam did us a very big favor by rejecting human exceptionalism, because as scientists understand that the universe is a lot bigger than we thought it was, and that, in fact, the Earth is not the center of existence, right? But that planet Earth revolves around the sun, that for many was perceived as a religious crisis. And if you don't buy into the centrality of the human being and the centrality of planet Earth, then somehow you can't accept the Torah. So Rav Kook says the fact that the Rambam said, what's one thing have to do with the other? You don't have to buy into a geocentric conception of the universe in order to be a good Jew and a believing Jew. So the Rambam does a favor, though the Rav Kook actually suggests that the Rambam is not necessarily taking a stand on it. He's just saying that you don't have to believe it as a cardinal belief of Judaism.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
That disturbed me last week, actually, when you made the statement that Rambam doesn't believe in human exceptionalism, which I find a very troublesome term in English. Because to my mind, whenever I've read the relevant passages, assuming I've read them in Rambam, he makes a point, of course, that you're talking about, which he talks about the angels being above and so on and so forth. But certainly on Earth, he makes it clear that humans are number one. So if humans are number one on Earth, so what if there are angels flying around somewhere doing a shlichut from God? They're doing whatever God tells them to do. That's got nothing to do with me as a human being who has to do mitzvot.
Yeah. So now you're starting to sound like Bruce. I think maybe it's like infectious a little bit here. So let me try to illustrate why I think that it is problematic to accept this notion that, well, out there may be superior beings, but since down on Earth we're the king of the jungle, then why should it bother us? So I'll tell you why. So I sometimes make a joke that I am the chief rabbi of Rehov Male Michael Arba Aleph. I'm not even sure, maybe apartment number 1. To say that somehow I'm utterly exceptional within the context,
which room,
and a limited context, that somehow takes the wind out of the sails of exceptionalism. So,
except Rambam doesn't talk about life on other planets. He talks about life on Earth and keeping the Torah, and within that context, we're the number one. We're the center of it.
Yeah. So I'm not sure why that makes you feel so much better.
No,
wouldn't you rather be an angel in which you can have far superior vision of the reality of God? And furthermore, he actually uses these really derogatory terms in referring to human beings. Let me just see if I can just pull that up real quick. Here, let me just see. Yeah. So he says, so this is in source number 16, which you might have in front of you, right? He says, when man, here, I'll just pull it up here. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but this actually is the point here of our discussion, so I don't mind discussing this. So when man contemplates concerning these things and perceives all creatures, I didn't do a screen share.
So we got it. We got the PDF.
Yeah, okay, but let me just pull it up anyway. I'm not sure everybody has it. Okay, everybody ready? Do you see that text in front of you?
Yeah.
Okay. So when man contemplates concerning these things, perceives all creatures, whether angel, sphere, or man, the likeness of himself, and discovers the wisdom of the Holy and Blessed be He, in all beings of form and in all creatures, his love for the omnipresent increases, and his soul and body thirst and yearn to love him. Blessed be He. So in other words, to the extent that God has created this vast universe, it makes us feel even greater awe of God and love of God, right? And fear and terror because of his own insignificance, shortcomings, and levity seize him when comparing himself to one of the great and holy bodies. Verily, so to one of the pure forms, separated from bodies of clay, which never joined a body of clay. He will then find himself likened to a vessel full of shame, disgrace, empty, and wanting. So I guess, Danny, if you want to view yourself as a vessel full of shame and disgrace, empty and wanting, I don't know. I'd rather have a little bit more self-esteem than that.
Yeah, but I mean, we are part of the animal kingdom. We just happen to be the top of the animal food chain or whatever. And the angels are not part of the animal kingdom. I don't have any problem with that.
Okay, so I understand. Okay, you could say that, except for I just don't blame the Rambam or don't attribute it to the Rambam, because the Rambam says that when you look in the mirror, if you contemplate the vastness of creation and you look in the mirror, you will find a vessel full of shame and disgrace, right? Empty and wanting. I think that has implications. So, right? The Rambam doesn't say ignore the fact that there are superior creatures, because after all, you're the king of the jungle in Male Michael Arba Aleph apartment 1. Right? He doesn't say that. He says, on the contrary, that you should consider the vastness of creation and you realize how insignificant you are. Okay, so we then saw, after we saw that Rob Cook actually gives a big yashar koach to the Rambam for saying that it's not an article of faith to believe that we are the center of all existence, though he seems to suggest the Rambam doesn't necessarily hold that way. Personally, he just says it's not an article of faith. By the way, I think that's hard to say such a thing. After all, we just read that the Rambam does seem to say that we are a speck of dust, a vessel full of shame and filth compared to angels, for instance.
Yes, but he's not hinting in any way, to my reading, that there are other worlds or other intelligent creatures. He's just saying we may be the only ones. You could read it like that if you wanted to. We may be the only ones, and we're a speck of dust.
No, because he's saying compared to angels, right? In other words, there are beings out there that
Yeah,
are
but
superior.
angels are angels. No, I mean, Bruce's original question that prompted this entire series was other intelligent beings. I don't think he was meaning angels. He was referring to Bruce. Do you want to jump in here? You were
Yeah, but I'm
talking
not sure why should it matter whether it's something you would call an angel or a separate intelligence, to use an Aristotelian term,
Because an
or
angel's
calling it a
a
Martian.
supernatural type of a force. My question was in relation to the pasuk that you wanted to examine, what came down from above and took these women, and some said angels, and some said, well, they're just superior people, but human. And I said, well, why can't they just come down and just be whatever they are? Why invent a supernatural idea as opposed to other creatures that are just we don't know about them? The universe is infinite, and it's an infinite universe. So the fact that there might be creatures out there somewhere else, we would know about it. It doesn't affect us at the moment. What difference might it make one way or the other? And they have their own Torah, and God
Yeah,
creates the whole universe along with them.
yeah.
And we're
So,
just the smartest ones. We think on this planet.
well, I'm taking your observation or question and just magnifying it, right? So, according to the Rambam, it could be that there's other creatures, and they may be intelligent, and they even be superior. Is the point? And what were the implications philosophically, spiritually?
I don't know why this
Of that notion?
superiority, why that superiority thing has to. What are we low self-esteem? We have to worry about the pecking order. Any
Yeah,
one of us dropped off in the desert where bugs would survive, or the jungle animals, we wouldn't survive. So it all depends in what environment you want to gauge our superiority in. In a frat, there's no dog smarter than we are, but other than that, we wouldn't do very well in most of the habitats of the planet. So what does that mean? I mean, I don't know. So superiority is an interesting point. Maybe IQ power, but I haven't tested the octopus. I haven't tested the dog. I have no idea.
okay. So I just want to show you something, and this is a source I just added this morning. So do you see the source number 21 here? That's showing up on your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this is a really important article. I really recommend people. It's long. It's called "Man's Position in the Universe," written in 1965. He mostly is contrasting and comparing the Rambam with Rosadia Gaon. He wants to claim that the Rambam has this notion that man is not the center of the universe, etc. We're not necessarily even the most superior thing in existence, and it doesn't matter. You'll see in a second what he says. As opposed to Rav Sadia Gaon, we saw Rav Sadia Gaon. We saw both sources. Rav Sadia Gaon has this idea that of a geocentric conception of the universe, and then he has this kind of like metaphysics that says something which is in the center is more significant. There can't even be other intelligent beings that are out there because they can't be out there because that which is more heavy falls to the center, right? So it's a sort of like combination between philosophy and physics. He takes a very extreme position, Rabbi Lamb, on this. His reading of the Rambam is very extreme, and this is his last paragraph. Man's intellectual endowments are sufficient to make him responsive to the divine command, to the whole of Torah. These rational gifts, fully developed by man in his pristine state before the sin of Adam, qualify man for the greatest imaginable ambition, the knowledge of God, both in its purely philosophic sense and in the sense of leading to man's moral life by means of imitating God. There is no need to exaggerate man's importance and to exercise a kind of racial or global, I would say even now cosmic arrogance, in order to discover the sources of man's significance and uniqueness. So he's sort of psychologizing this as well, right? Why is it significant that we have a sense of human exclusiveness or uniqueness? Because we want to feel important. We want to feel significant. And one could argue that if there are other beings out there that are just as intelligent or maybe more and have free will that somehow impinges upon our significance. So Rabbi Lamb wants to argue that how do you measure significance? What is the definition of significance? And he says, what can be more significant than the ability to know God, both in a sort of philosophical sense, and to know God by imitating how God wants us to live in this world. That's what gives us significance, by being an Oved Hashem, being a God-centered person, or a Torah Jew, okay, in the fullest sense of the word. And that is the end all and be all of life, and it is the source of our sense of significance. The fact that there may be something else out there that does that, so what? How does that make us less significant? That's his argument. Now, I think that represents Bruce's viewpoint, and Danny, I think it may represent your viewpoint as well. And he seems to, and he suggests that this is the Rambam's viewpoint. Now, I'm not sure the Rambam says this. Matter right, when the Rambam talks about looking at ourselves as a vessel full of shame and filth, I don't see this reflecting the Rambam's view. So I want to try something. I want to think about this together, because I think the jury is out. Rabbi Lamb was a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik, and it's interesting how the students of Rabbi Soloveitchik, I think this is true with every great personality, the students tend to grab onto a certain component of their Rebbe. So in a philosophical sense, Rabbi Lamb may be one of the foremost exponents of the philosophical Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Schechter would be perhaps the greatest, Rav Hershel Schechter, the greatest living exponent of the kind of the halachic Rav Soloveitchik. So I want to take a look at a piece from Rav Soloveitchik that addresses this issue and see if, in fact, Rav Soloveitchik, who was so Maimonidean in his orientation, has this notion that the end-all and be-all of significance is for us to be an Oved Hashem. And that is the definition of significance. We need nothing more. So let's take a look at this piece from Rav Soloveitchik. So this is, I actually have a Hebrew version of it as well. So Isha Halacha, the famous essay, Halachic Man. So source number 24, and we'll just read it here in English. So let's take a look at this, and I'd like to hear what you think about this. Homo religiosus is indeed highly subjective. So the spiritual person, there are people out there that are spiritual. Okay, that's not the same thing as being religious. Okay, you can be very spiritual and eat cheeseburgers. Right? It is in this light, well, maybe not cheeseburgers. You'd have to be a vegan. So whatever, you get the idea. It is in this light that we can understand the deep contradiction pervading the spiritual self-evaluation of Homo religiosus, right? Spiritual person. On the one hand, he senses his own lowliness and insignificance, his own frailty and weakness. He knows that even a gnat preceded him, a snail preceded him. So a spiritual person is very humble. He compares himself to the rest of creation. This sounds a lot like, at first glance, the Rambam talked about. Though you're going to see, the Rambam was not a Homo religiosus. The Rambam was Rav Soloveitchik, which is a different species of human being. We'll see in a second. He sees himself as the one biological creature who has misused his own talents for destructive ends, who has failed in the tasks assigned to him. So we're worse than a gnat, worse than a snail, because at least they follow God's will. On the other hand, he is aware of his greatness and loftiness, how his spirit breaks through all barriers and ascends to the very heights, bores through all obstacles and descends to the very depths. Is he not the crown of creation, to whom God granted dominion over all the work of his hands? So we're both the lowliest of lows because we misuse our free will. And we also have the ability to, through technology, through science, to be able to do things, manipulate the world around us in a way which no animal can do. There's no animal which has ever created a air conditioning. They just sweat. In the depths of his consciousness, he is entangled in the thicket of two contradictory verses. One verse declares, when I behold thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast established. What, on the other hand, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou thinkest of him, right? So we're amazing and we're horrible. Which one are we? While the other verse declares, yet thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Thou hast made him have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet. And Homo religiosus has yet to find the third harmonizing verse, right? We're horrible people who misuse our free will, but from a technological point of view, we're unbelievable. However, halachic man, here's Isha halacha. What's halachic man? He has found the third verse. This is a play on this idea that in the attributes of, or the techniques of Torah interpretation that we recite in the morning, in the beginning of davening, two verses, one contradicts the other, you bring a third verse, which then resolves it. So he's using it in a philosophical sense. Halachic man has a third verse, a third concept, the halakha. He too suffers from this dualism, from this deep spiritual split. But he mends the split through the concept of halakha and law. What does that mean? If man hath no preeminence above a beast for all his vanity, then what is the nature of Yom Kippur? What is the meaning of pardon and forgiveness? What is the purpose of the sacrificial service of the day? The private, intimate encounter between the high priest and his creator in the Holy of Holies. What is the whole nature of the holiness of the day? That holiness which bestows atonement upon us. Why should we be confronted at all with the concept of sin and iniquity on the one side and the obligation to repent on the other? Indeed, the halakha set man at the very center of the world, and the Day of Atonement attests to this. Indeed, I'm the one creature in this world who reflects the image of divine presence. Do I not study the Torah, the cherished plaything of the Holy One, blessed be He? The angels themselves long to learn Torah from me. Am I not at this very moment reaching out to my lover and beloved, meaning God? In the blinking of an eye, the lowliest of creatures turns into the noblest of creatures, whom the Holy and Blessed be He elected at the very inception and recognized as worthy of standing before Him, standing before God. What self-esteem is present here? This is a really marvelous and paragraph here. And you notice he invokes the self-esteem notion of exclusiveness, right? When we look in the mirror, what are you supposed to see? Now, does this sound like Rabbi Lamb? What's he saying here? Right? Rabbi Lamb says, it doesn't matter that there may be superior creatures. After all, we have our Torah, and we spend our life studying it and living in accordance with it, and that's the only thing we have to know. What could be more affirming of our value than that? Is that what Rav Soloveitchik is saying? And I need some help here. What do you say? It's hard. I'm not sure. This is not rhetorical. I'm not faking this. I'm not really sure.
I think Rav Soloveitchik is saying very clearly. Am I echoing here? I think he's saying very clearly that we are the center. The whole purpose of Yom
as a function of what?
Of creation.
And in what? Yeah, but what makes us special?
He doesn't say that. He talks about Yom Kippur specifically, but that's maybe referring to the idea of free choice, the fact that we get rewarded with sachar and onesh, we get rewarded for doing mitzvahs and get punished for doing averos, and we have an opportunity to repent once a year. But I don't know if he's saying that's the center of our Jewish life, or it's just an example of why man is at the center. Yeah.
So. Yeah, any other comments? I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to respond in a second, Danny. But any other comments?
And I'm not sure this whole parrot could be equally true if an octopus had an higher IQ than us under the water? I mean, again, I don't see the connection between the exceptionalism and these lists of questions.
Yeah,
Just for
because he
argument's
says
sake,
no. Because oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. What don't you see here?
let's just say that if we could figure out how to test the IQ power of an octopus, that they had actually had an higher IQ than we did, what difference would that make to this entire paragraph?
Yeah, because when he says at the very last uh, sentence here, what self-esteem is present here? That's not a question. That's a statement. Right? He's saying
Right.
the fact that we are utterly categorically unique because only a human
We
being has the ability, and Danny, I agree with you, to do tshuva, to make choices. I think that's what he's talking about here. That we
yeah, but the
study
Rambam says
Torah
we're higher
because
on this chain. The Rambam says we're higher on the chain, and they don't have that characteristic.
yeah. What
So
if they and what if they did?
well, I'm saying, yeah, what if they it happens they don't, and yet they're viewed as a higher spiritually. They can't do tshuva. Um, I mean, it's a very interesting philosophical point. That is, I don't see what it has to do with our initial question. But granted, it's very interesting that of all the animals that live in a frat, so we can fit this paradigm. Okay, it's very nice. But what do you do with that information necessarily?
So, I mean, his point is that if in Alon Shvut there are superior creatures, let's assume for a second that may be true. So you may be king of the jungle in Efrat, but don't go to Alon Shvut. It's going to be a terrible blow to your ego, to your self-esteem. So the same thing that, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, I think he says we're utterly singular. We're utterly unique in that sense that we can learn Torah and uh, and make correct choices. We can
What if an
we can
artificial
repent.
intelligence could do that also? I mean, they're working artificial intelligence in a very serious manner. What if they too made better choices and regretted making wrong choices? I mean, we're on the cusp of a certain
I don't
technology.
think artificial intelligence can regret.
What if it did? I'm just theoretically. What if it did?
Yeah, but well,
Just what if it did? So what we make
I
of
mean,
it?
yeah. So let's just forget about entire artificial intelligence. Just say it's something from another planet, right? So according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, I think he would say that would impair our self-esteem. And self-esteem is
Well,
not a bad thing. A person has to feel that they're utterly valuable and one of a kind in some way. We are one of a kind.
so, so isn't that circular reasoning? I want to have self-esteem, so I'm going to believe that we're exceptional. Why do I want to feel exceptional? Because I want to have high self-esteem. It may
Okay.
be completely untrue, but it's a nice idea. I guess if
Yeah.
you're going to counsel someone, it's nice to tell them that, whether it's true or not, right? I
Yeah.
mean, why
That's
not
true.
build up someone's
That that
self-esteem?
that that that's true. Right? He doesn't excuse me, I'll just turn this off.
It doesn't prove anything. It just shows that self-esteem is a good idea,
You
perhaps.
know what? I this is very bad form, but I have to take this. I'll be right with you. Just hang 1 second. Hi, Shalid. Yeah, Litrom. Yeah. Okay, bye. Bye. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. So, it may be correct what you're saying, Bruce, that it's circular. And I don't think Rabbi Soloveitchik here is trying to argue in some kind of scientific or mathematical way. And it's very evocative here. The human being strives psychologically for a sense of self-esteem. And what greater self-esteem could there be? Instead of being in homo religiosis, where you're kind of schizophrenic, like I'm the worst, or maybe I'm the best. And I'm not really sure because I have this sort of superiority in the sense that I can invent air conditioning, but I also can behave in a way which contradicts God's will, and I'm worse than a gnat. Whereas the one who is living in accordance with the Torah, so he has this ability to make moral decisions based upon the understanding of God's will through the study of Torah, and in that sense, he stands before God in this particularly intimate way, and that capability has a free will makes him utterly unique. He need have no inferiority complex when he compares himself to a gnat. So I must say that even though I don't think Rabbi Lamb is true to what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying here, but I can imagine a reading of this which Rabbi Lamb might have had, and that is, you notice how he goes from Yom Kippur, which Danny, I think you're right, this notion of free will, the ability to critique our own behavior and make fundamental changes. But then he talks about do not study the Torah, the cherished plaything of the whole blessed be He. The angels themselves long to learn Torah from me. That sounds like Rabbi Soloveitchik a lot, and that sounds like a Brisker a lot. That is, the end all and be all of existence is the study of Torah. There is nothing else that gives us significance, and we live like I studied with one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's students for 4 years, Rabbi Parnas. Rabbi Parnas used to say, a Jew has to feel he's living, he called it the halachic universe. The universe out there, it's only secondarily relevant. We live in a halachic universe. It's a construct that we try to understand based upon the Torah. It's a unique universe that we live in. It's not the identical universe that a physicist would explore. The halachic universe. It's no less real. It's a dimension that we have access to through the Torah. The Torah is our microscope and it's our telescope. And that is the end all and be all of existence, is understanding that unique universe which we inhabit, using our telescope and microscope, which is the Torah. See, if that were true, then I could understand Rabbi Lamb and I could understand Bruce and maybe Danny a little bit. And that is that what else happens out there in the universe that physicists study is interesting. But it does not in any way impinge upon our uniqueness as inhabitants and explorers of the halachic universe. There may be things that are even some way smarter than us out there. Doesn't matter, because it's a different dimension. It's almost irrelevant. In the halachic universe, which is the world in which God has placed me, and He's given me this telescope and microscope, in that context, I am utterly unique and blessed that He has given us this telescope, microscope, by which to understand this unique dimension of reality that we inhabit. It sounds a little bit like Rabbi Lamb could interpret what he's saying in that spirit. I don't know, any questions or comments on this, and then we'll go on. Okay, so Rabbi Lamb is definitely the farthest extreme that I've been able to find from an Orthodox perspective, that it really wouldn't matter what we discover at all. And that's Bruce's, I think, line. I just want to point out that if one were to ask a more academic question, not how do I feel about my self-esteem and to what extent my self-esteem is dependent upon or influenced by superior creatures existing or not, let's just academically, what do Jewish sources have to say about the importance of feeling unique? Just want to show you some interesting sources here. Is a famous Mishnah Sanhedrin. It is for this reason that man was first created as one person. The context is interesting. It's what you're supposed to tell the witnesses before they testify against somebody, which would then result in the person being executed. So the court chose to tell the person, before you testify, think twice, because there's tremendous implications about putting someone to death. And here's what you're supposed to tell. This drasha, the court tells the potential witness. It is for this reason that man was first created as one person. Why did God create just one person, Adam? He could have created 150 people simultaneously to express the grandeur of the Holy and Blessed be He. For a man strikes many coins from the same die, and all the coins are alike, right? Mint, all the coins look alike. But the King of Kings, the Holy and Blessed be He, strikes every man from the die of the first man. We're all descended from one human being, so we all have the same DNA, so we should all look like Adam. And yet no man is quite like his friend. We all look utterly unique. So that makes us think, wow, God is amazing. He's even more amazing than a king who can mint a coin, because the coins don't look different, each one. But God is capable of using one mint, and we all look unique. But what's sort of the spiritual implication of that, besides thinking that God is amazing? Why did God do that? Because God wanted us to feel, therefore each and everyone must say that famous phrase, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. For me, the world is created. So you see here this, the mission itself thinks that there is great significance, psychological, spiritual significance in feeling utterly unique. So much so that the world is incomplete without me. I am vital to the world's existence. My life has infinite value, critical value. Wow. When we move away from a anthropocentric view of existence, it waters down this notion of being able to say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, the world is created for me. I am vital. Interesting. I didn't make that up. That's Chazal. And from a Orthodox perspective, we sort of feel that we have to sort of contour our beliefs within some kind of spectrum that we see in our sacred literature, which precedes us. I mean, not every Orthodox Jew feels that way, but I think that's a kind of a symptom, as it were, of orthodoxy. Let's take a look at another passage, this time in the Talmud. We'll just skip to the second paragraph here. The Holy and Blessed be He said to Israel, my daughter, I created 12 constellations in the firmament. And for each and every constellation, I've created 30 armies. And for each and every army, I've created 30 legions. And for each and every legion, I've created 30 infantry divisions. This is the universe, the stars, right? You look up there and you see millions of stars, this infinite galaxies. And for each and every division leader, I've created 30 military camp leaders. And for each and every military camp, I've created 30 leaders of forts. And on each and every leader of a fort, I've hung 365,000 stars corresponding to the days of the solar year. That's a pretty expansive view of the universe. And all of them I've created only for your sake. And you said, the Lord has forsaken me and the Lord has forgotten me. This whole cosmos was just for you. And how hurtful that you feel, and how wrong-headed you feel that God doesn't pay attention to you. Wow, okay. Take a look at another source from our sages. This is Midrash Rabbah and Kohelet on Ecclesiastes. This is very famous among environmentally minded Jews. Look at God's work. For who can straighten what he has twisted? So that's a pasuk in Kohelet. When the Holy One, blessed be He, created the first human, He took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, look at my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And all that I've created, it was for you that I created it. Pay attention that you do not corrupt and destroy my world, for if you corrupt it, there is no one to repair it after you. It's all for you. It's whole cosmos. It's all for you. Okay, so I just want to point out that if we were to take a look at the writings of our sages, in the Talmudic sages, I think this is a pretty typical, this notion of absolute human exclusiveness, uniqueness, I think it's fair to say that that's the view of our sages. Now, person doesn't necessarily feel philosophically confined by their view, but it is something to take consideration. That I think it's fair enough to say that that is their view. And I think there's
Is it fair to say, and I hate to come down on the side of Bruce in this because I'm totally against his ideas, but wouldn't it, I mean, logic dictates that if Chazal are relating to Earth only, which is this kind of passage as an example, and you've brought several passages, then on Earth there's no question that we're the kings. But they didn't even relate to the possibility of other civilizations most of the time.
okay. So it is true, technically speaking, that the last source is limited to planet Earth, maybe even smaller, the Garden of Eden, right? Or he does say my world, okay? But how about this previous one about all the stars and all that? So that's the cosmos, right? But more than that. So let me ask you something, Danny. Ask you a very personal question here. What if they were to discover at the bottom of the ocean a creature from the Black Lagoon? Turns out that this creature here on terra firma, well, actually not terra firma, but planet Earth, there's actually something which is smarter and has free will. Would that be problematic from a Torah perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Because we're told by Chazal and Rishonim and everyone else, there seems to be a uniform line that even if you were not to say, if you go according to Rambam and say the world wasn't created for man, which is apparently a minority opinion, but even if you went with that, you'd still have to say that we have a purpose in this world, and the purpose is to do Torah mitzvot, and we're given that by virtue of our ability, which is unique among the animal kingdom, to think intellectually and get closer to Hashem. So then what's our purpose? What's my purpose as a Jew if there are other creatures in the animal world that can do it equally just as well as I can?
Okay, so I hear it. So Bruce Markowitz and my wife, I discussed this with my wife this morning. I think she sides with Bruce on this issue. She said the following. Guess what? There are a lot of Chinese people on this planet. Now, those Chinese people are just as smart as Jews and presumably have the same free will that Jews have. That's right here on planet Earth. There's another type of species out there, smart and have free will. Why does it bother? It doesn't bother us.
Doesn't bother us.
So why should that? So if we could find a creature Black Lagoon at the bottom of the ocean, that's even less problematic. It's the bottom of the ocean, but the Chinese are everywhere.
But they're not different animals. And a brilliant octopus with an IQ of 500 is an animal. It's a different animal than I am. It doesn't bother me that Chinese are human beings who could be more intelligent than I am. I mean, according to Chazal, they're supposed to, in the end, reach an appreciation of God just like me.
I'm not so sure that that's agreed upon by everybody.
I mean, if we did find that creature in the Black Lagoon, so then what? Let's just say, for argument's sake, play the chess game and the next move. Would we say?
So Rabbi Lamb would say, "What do you care? You have a Torah. You know your job. You have a you have a certain type of relationship with God. The fact that there are other creatures out there that have a different relationship with God, so what? Not your business even."
That answers why I don't really understand Danny's consternation that if it would exist, he can't be a practicing Jew. Someone ruins his Judaism if that would exist. I don't understand that.
Because I think Rambam may be the clearest in expressing the philosophy, the idea that we are unique among the animals, at least on this earth that we know of, that can get closer to God by virtue of our intellect.
So that's the theoretical. What if in fact he's just wrong? What happens if we discover that he's wrong?
Then I
Do
have
we
a
give up
problem.
Judaism? Is that it? It's all
Yeah,
over?
yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Yeah, I don't understand the why. Why?
Because if an octopus can get closer to God by virtue of his intellect than I can, then I can get closer to God. Then what's my purpose in this life?
You know, so
Yeah, I don't understand
the
that.
fact that many men are married to women in this planet, and each of us is trying to cultivate an intimate relationship. I mean that in the full sense of the word intimate, like so emotional, right? So the fact that there are other couples out there in the world that are doing that too in their own way, like why does that bother you in terms of this great task of yours of surviving marriage for the next 50 years? It's your challenge. It's your context. The
Well,
fact that yeah,
I can only go back to Rambam because that's probably the source that I know the best personally. But even though he says in a very interesting source that you brought here that we're not the center of the universe, meaning the universe was not created for man, and it's a mistake to think it is. But at the same time, he does say in several places, in tens of places, that we are who we are, and we were given the task that we were given by virtue of our intellect and our capacity to get close to God. So if I take that away as a unique feature of man, then what's my purpose? Why was I put here?
yeah. So and Bruce would say, so the Rambam was wrong. Uh, but not everything. If you take a brick out of a building, it depends upon the brick. Not every building is going to collapse depending upon the brick you pull out. So we pulled out a brick from the Rambam's philosophical edifice. So what?
Wow.
Does the structure collapse?
Yeah, no, but the Rambam is on the left extreme, meaning, I mean, that's a funny way of putting it, but no, by making this it's sort of an extreme statement to say the world, for Judah, I believe, for Jewish rabbis, to say that the world wasn't created for man, that's sort of an extreme position.
Well, as
But
far
even
as they knew
according to
it
him,
was.
I think even according to Rambam, you have a problem because having said that, he'll still say, yeah, but we have a task on this earth. What do you
Okay,
do
so
with, what do you do with 90% of the other Chachamim who say that we were the point of the creation of the universe?
so first of all, we can make a distinction between philosophy and halakha,
Right.
right? That when it comes to halakha, so we got to toe the line, but philosophy is open, right? Furthermore, you might have to take your drawing of the Rambam off your wall and put Rabbi Lamb in his place. You have a new Rebbe.
If it's proved correct. I mean, if the Rambam happens to be wrong in certain areas, so be it. I mean, there's medical information all over Gemara and practiced by the Rambam. He was just wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
That's science. That's not philosophy.
But even in philosophy, it's simply okay to be wrong. Philosophy is just philosophizing.
But
And he
does
could be wrong.
anyone? But excuse me, Bruce and Rabbi Zeth. I mean, is there anyone in the Jewish world serious? I mean, heavyweight that would say that our task, not as Jews necessarily, as human beings on this planet, is to get closer to God, and we do this by virtue of our intellect?
Would anybody disagree with that? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Yeah. We have to get into nuances because they might say, "What do you mean by intellect?" Like we get closer to God through understanding His will and then abiding by it. They wouldn't
Okay.
necessarily define it in a philosophical sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Of course, you're right. That Hasidic masters would certainly not go through the intellectual route to getting close to Hashem. They talk about Devekus and all
Right.
sorts of more spiritual ideas. But
And
at the end of
even
the
very
day,
suspicious of intellect in a philosophical sense.
okay, but either way, all the rabbis seem to agree there's something in human nature that we were created with, that God gave us, that uniquely among all the creatures on earth enables us to get closer to God, should
Uh,
we so choose to do so.
so if you were to remove the word uniquely, would the edifice of Judaism crumble?
Yes, I believe so.
Why?
If I'm not unique, then why do I need to keep the Torah?
Because the Torah is, it's your marriage with God. Right? Uh, God is a kind of has a lot of wives. I don't know, whatever we are, and everybody has their own relationship with Him, and they cultivate it in a way which is unique to their personality. The fact that God has other suitors out there or other spouses, it's not your business.
I think you take away not just a brick out of I think you take away the foundation out of the tower.
Yeah. So you're like actually bouncing quite a bit around here today.
Sorry about that.
I think you started out a little bit more on the like, yeah, you're right, it doesn't matter side. I would say the following. I think you're right, psychologically, spiritually, but I'm not sure why logically it's true. I understand this need to feel that I'm on this planet with a unique agenda and mission and empowerment. But I understand psychologically. I don't understand why logically.
Well, but doesn't the Torah tell us all over the place that we are, well, you can, my children would have a problem with the expression the chosen people, but we are Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, right? We are a holy nation. We are a kingdom of Kohanim. So, I mean, tens of places and different ways of saying that. What does that mean if there are other creatures on earth that also have, well, they also have their special features?
Okay,
right?
so now we're gonna have to get radical. If the Rambam could say that if he would have been convinced that Aristotle's notion of the eternity of existence is true, he would have reinterpreted the Torah accordingly. If the Rambam was capable of taking something which is so obvious in the Torah that God created the world and that there's a beginning, but he doesn't feel necessarily obligated to read it in that way, if he philosophically disagreed, then you could certainly solve almost any problem of a philosophical difference with the plain meaning of the Torah by simply saying, I'll interpret it differently.
Well, you've just managed to pull out the ace card because, I can't argue with that. And you've brought like the most radical idea ever in Rambam.
I know, but as far as I know, the Rambam is still an Orthodox rabbi, I think.
Yeah, I know, but there was
especially if you're gonna use the Rambam, then you have to use everything that he says. I mean, he's your rabbi, he's not your rabbi.
That's why they burned his books, right?
Yeah,
no, you personally can't cherry pick.
From our perspective, I think we consider him kosher. So I actually just want to. So we're not going to be able to solve this, but I think we really fleshed out some of the issues very well. What I'd like to do is just end with something I found. This is like really interesting. It's a poem that Rav Kook wrote. It was recently discovered that he apparently wrote before he moved to Israel. So it was sort of the younger stage of his life. And it's in very hard Hebrew. It's long. But Tzalon Naor, who you may have heard of, is one of the main kind of publicizers of Rav Kook's teachings, especially in translation. He published the English translation of the work Orot and many other texts of Rav Kook. So he created a English rendering of Rav Kook's poem. I also have to tell you that Tzalon Naor explains he had to actually take two poems and kind of splice them together to get this. So let's take a look at what he says here. It's really interesting. So he says the following. A speck of dust orbits a shining disk. No, speck of dust is Earth, right? The shining disk is the sun. Some fragile creatures call it Earth. The disk they revere as sun. We're the fragile creatures, okay? As tiny as the speck is, it is great compared to its neighbor circling about it, the moon. So we may be small, but the moon is even smaller. Of the creatures, there is one possessing language and logic. It named itself man. So we're very cool. We're down here. We can think. We have intellect. mighty among midgets. So we're all midgets down here because we're just on this little planet. But we like to think of ourselves as being important. So we call ourselves man, and we think we're mighty among midgets. It stands erect. So does it walk, moving parts of its body. It calls them legs, right? We even give names to these really important parts of us that distinguish us perhaps from other things that exist on this planet. From the rays of the disk enveloping the speck, there is light. Perceptible by a small circle, aqueous and fleshly, the creature calls it the eye. So we can use our eye, we look out, we see the sun, right? And there's light that's coming from the sun, shines upon this little speck we call the earth. This tiny creature is full of powerful imagination as it rises up on its speck of dust, facing the shining disk. So we think quite a bit of ourselves. We have powerful imagination. We stand upright and look at the sun. The speck is great in its eyes, and to the disk it accords the glory of a god. The creature is filled with feelings of pride. We are so smart. And the sun is actually so amazing that maybe it's even a deity. It measures the speck's orbit around the disk to mark time. It means human beings. Okay, so we revolve around the sun, and we call that time. We have all these human constructs. Okay, hang on. Sufficient to gauge its habitation upon its speck, right? So we've got this thing called time, and now we can measure years and how long we survive here. The rays of the disk also stream heat that the creature and its neighbors on the speck might live. The duration of its life amounts to so many orbits of the speck around the shining sun, 70 years, whatever. Life is in flux, a creature dies and others replace it. Wondrously, they are all of a single image. That's, by the way, that source in Chazal that we just saw about that even though we're all different, we're all in some way made b'Tselem Elokim. This wonderful creature, mighty among midgets, has a conception, a thought, and a very mighty will. So we think we're very cool, and we have come up with this idea, and we have a strong ratzon, will. Now I've got to go up to the top. They all come up with the novel idea of fratricide. Let's get together and let's kill our competitors, some other species of human beings. They meet to plan terminating life. They quarrel over a piece of the speck. Who should rule? Sovereignty, they call it. These are nations. They're all fighting with each other because they're expressions of ego, who's in charge, and we can kill other creatures in order to express our significance, our sovereignty over the speck. See, they don't think of it as a speck. Rav Kook's calling it a speck. After many orbits and many changings of the creatures, the conception grows. The thought takes wing. It appears from their movements that they've begun to appreciate their petty value, and their pride in the speck and the disk has been reduced. It's but a few more orbits until their intelligence is sharpened. Wow, evolution. Science, we realize that, hey, there's a lot more out there than just us, and we're not quite as significant as we may think. When these puny creatures will inherit the earth of truth, their spirit will soar despite their humble abode. The more we see the significance, the vastness of the cosmos, the more we become, we access truth, and our spirit soars. But humility as well. They will recognize their true measure, these tiny creatures. Then they will truly grow in spirit, when they will search for habitation upon the terrain of truth. Truth is the living spring to which we angels accord honor. With intelligence, now listen to this, they will ascend beyond the orbit of the speck, beyond the compass of the disk. In infinite expanses they will dwell. Rav Kook is envisioning a time when we go beyond the Earth's atmosphere, and we can actually explore other solar systems, other planets, and even colonize Mars. Love will nestle in their midst, strength of spirit from the life of worlds, when they fully comprehend how minuscule they are. So this is really interesting balance between greatness and humility. Spiritual greatness and humility coexist. and we will colonize Mars and realize that we are just one part of this gigantic universe. We become spiritually great and humble simultaneously. These diminutive creatures surpass us in knowledge and elan, in mighty will, full of unbounded expanses. Eternal life shall start flowing in them. Mighty horizons shall open up for them. From world to world, they'll garner strength, and the spirit of the living God will pulsate in them. This is his optimistic ending, that as we explore the greatness of the universe, and in fact, as our technological prowess becomes expanded, we can even inhabit other places in the universe, our sense of spiritual wisdom will expand in humility. And that is, in fact, our greatness. And the spirit of the living God will pulsate in them. Really fascinating poem, probably written at the very end of the 19th century, perhaps at the very beginning of the 20th century, by Ralph Cook. So envisioning all of human history through technological discovery, which then corresponds with ultimate spiritual enlightenment, greatness, and yet humility and spiritual greatness coexisting at the same time. Ralph Cook's very positive and optimistic sense of things, and definitely conceiving of the vastness of the universe and even the ability to colonize other planets other than planet Earth. And with that really interesting poem, we will say adieu to you and to the topic. And we'll go on with another interesting topic, Bezrat Hashem, next week.
Thank you, Reza. Thank you.
Gosh,
Take care, everybody.